I wanted to do a video that focuses specifically on checks because I think they're kind of the most unique and also maybe counterintuitive aspect of the platform, but they're very critical to the way it works and the value it offers. So here we're on the checks screen here, on the checks page, and on one side we have sort of the checks. Let's call this kind of the execution side. This is the side where one completes checks. And right now there are none that are particularly urgent, and so they're in the upcoming checks dropdown. But the idea here is basically to say don't pay attention to it if it's not something you need to pay attention to soon, because that's the point of checks, right? The point is for it to pop onto the screen when the user needs to deal with it. Like we showed in the other video, we can see the ones that have been completed, and we can see the ones that have expired. But the primary screen here will be the ones that are live, and to be able to see the upcoming live ones. Here is where we create checks, and maybe it makes sense to describe the structure that these have so that you can kind of better understand exactly how they work. But basically we have what I call a check thread, and that's the definition of the check, that's the name, it's what the schedule should be, that holds all that information. Each individual check is one that pops up according to how the check thread defines it. So the idea is that thread is like a thread of checks. And then there are inputs that go into those checks and whatever. But think in terms of this check thread, this group of checks, and the checks themselves. So here, one way to say it is cash drop and temp check, these are threads, right? And the threads are where you sort of set the definitions for the checks. And then on this side, we have the checks themselves, right? So this is a check. It's one instance of a check. Let's look at temp check because it's kind of the most obvious kind of canonical use case. So this is when you want to collect on a regular schedule the temperatures of the fridges. So we have an ability in settings to define pieces of equipment. In fact, the list of the equipment's here. So I have fridge 1 and fridge 2. Both of these are showing as operational because it is possible to set them as non-operational. But here we associate a piece of hardware with a check. You don't always have to do that. In the case of cash drop, you can see there's no device associated because there's not a device involved in cash drop. So let's close that. And also if you click this, you can go and see the status of that device. When you create a new check, which is done here, they start paused. I'll pause this one to make our life a little bit easier. So you pause this, there's no checks live. When you click this again, it schedules the first check and that setup is live. When you create a new one, it doesn't have all the information required. Like for example, if you're creating it, you still need to add things like the schedule. And so it creates paused, and then when it's defined and you're ready to go, you activate it by clicking that switch. Let's go into the specific features. This you'd actually use very little. This is the screen for setting a particular time for the next check. Normally what you do is set a schedule. And so we've created this complicated schedule interface here. But let's actually do this. Let me show you this in cash drop because I want to be able to show you exactly what happens when we reach the 4 minutes remaining here. And so if we configure this, it'll change that. So actually, you know what? That's a good idea. Let's have it change that. So currently this is set to repeat every 1 day. It automatically sets the time zone, but you can change that because depending on, of course, where you are in the world, where you're configuring it, the time zone actually does matter. So I'm in Berlin, and therefore it's set to one of the European time zones. But I can change this. So I can make this, instead of just an every 1 day schedule where I can add multiple times for it to happen in that day. I can also say that I want it to happen on a week-based schedule. And then I can pick which times that I want it to happen in that week. So let's say I select Monday. This will disappear if I don't. So if I select this, and I uncheck them, in order for it to retain being checked, you need to actually add a time, right? Because otherwise you can't have a day that's checked off with no time. So let's start with Monday. So add a time. I click this. I highly recommend using Chrome if you're on a computer to manage this, because Safari has a very frustrating way of showing time fields that is very confusing. It works fine on an iPad because it gives you like this type of this time chooser type thing. But if you're using a computer, I recommend using Chrome. So for clarity, this uses 24-hour time. So let's say Monday we want to have a check that happens at 9. So let's see, 9, and let's say we want it to be at 9:30. I don't know if you just heard that that notification sound, but that I think is the result of a new, here it is. So this temp check is now live, so you get a little notification just before it goes live. But that's about to change because we're changing it here. So we want it, let's say at 9, let's say 9 o'clock. Let's go to 00, 9 o'clock. Okay. And on Monday, let's say we want another time. We want it to be at 12:30. And we want another time. Let's say we want it at 3, let's say 4 o'clock. 4 o'clock. Pick this. And see, because these are all green, it means that the time has been set. If the border is red, it means that it has not been set. And so if you save or whatever, it's just going to delete that, right? So like if you just, so actually here's a good example, right? Here, if we click save now, it's only going to save these, right? So it's just clarifying that whatever you put in this field at this point will not be saved. And that matters if you're using a keyboard to enter it. But anyway, let's get rid of that. So you can remove times by clicking these, right? Of course, it needs at least one time, or if it doesn't have a time, you should just uncheck the whole day. Now, this would be a pain in the butt because a lot of times it would be a pain in the butt to repeat this for all the different days. So I've created this duplicate function. If we click that, it just keeps adding it to the next day, right? And so now it'll be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday at these times, and you can independently edit these, right? So let's say my understanding is that on Saturday you might open at a different time. Well, let's set this one for, let's say the first one is at 2 o'clock. Where is this? 2 o'clock. Okay. So now we click save, and we've saved this whole schedule, right? It can get more complicated. So if we wanted to, we could do it by month, and we could do it on a certain day of the month. So maybe this is like a maintenance schedule type thing, right? Now, this whole scheduling system also applies to tasks. So, it might not be that you put maintenance schedule in checks, you put it in tasks, but you can, part of the reason I wanted to show you checks is because it covers the more complicated functionality, some of which also exists for tasks. So let's say we want to do it every 1 month or maybe every 2 months, right? And we can have it either on a certain day of the month up until the last day, right? Because not every month has the same number of days, or on and then you add a week, and you have to pick which week, right? So it could be the first week, the second week, the third week, or the last week of the month. So because we've already filled out kind of the week information, it's just showing it to us here. So in this case, it would be every 2 months on the second week of the month on these days at these times, right? I'm not going to save this because it just makes it much more, it's a more complicated schedule. So I'll just close it and it'll remain at the schedule we just set, the weekly schedule. But as you can see, you can even add another week, right? So you can do it on the second week and on the fourth week at the following times. So it really lets you set a pretty complicated schedule for when checks appear. And that's the key point here. This is when the checks should appear on the screen. What happens after that, let's close this. So now we've saved this 1 week based schedule. What happens after it appears on the screen is kind of where the rest of the definition goes. So this one, as you saw, we had one that was just live there for 2 minutes. That's pretty short. Normally it'd probably be something closer to like 15 minutes. You can set it to disappear after it expires, right? There are certain things that like are not relevant after they've expired, and you don't want it cluttering up the screen. So default is that it disappears. Failure repeat. So let's say you do a temp check, it's outside the range, so it's failed. So you submit the number, it fails. That task should reappear again, or that check, should reappear again after how much time? Right now, it just does it immediately, right? And so you'd submit, it would be a failure, and immediately again the check would pop onto the screen and give you 15 minutes to complete it. That's the default because it's kind of, if somebody forgets to set this, it's the clearest way to present it. But we can set this to be 15 minutes, right? So in this case, if it fails, 15 minutes will go by, it'll appear on the screen, and when it appears, you'll have 15 minutes to complete the check. We can add a description, just describing what the check does. Not super important. More important is the user input requirements, right? So here we're requiring a person to check fridge number 1 on this schedule. You need at least one requirement in order to activate a check. So when you create a brand new check, part of it, like it won't let you activate it until you've set a requirement. So let's edit this requirement. So in this case, it must be equal to a value. In this case, I guess it's set to 1. So this is why beforehand, whatever we put in, it was failing because we weren't set it. We didn't put 1, right? This basically says the check must equal 1 or it fails. For a temp check, more likely is it would be between two numbers. So it must be between, let's say, 38 and the max will be 42. So it's between these and it's set to Fahrenheit, right? So it could be all kinds of things. Temp checks are the most obvious one, but this lets you set checks for all types of different things. Here, we'll extend this a little bit so it's all in the same line. So the input must be between 38 and 42 Fahrenheit. This is not a double blind check. We just need one person to check it. So we'll click update, and there it is, right? And we see that defined here. There's a check history. So this concept of a check thread, this is a history of the checks that were done, right? So in some sense, this in total is the check thread. Each of these individual ones are checks. This one's scheduled, so we don't have a completion time, but this shows you the history of all the checks and what happened. And also who completed the check. Again, we're using, on my local system here, I have these weird usernames, but this would normally show like the name of the person who completed the check, which is also why a shift has to be live and a person has to be selected in order for a check to be executed. So we can hide this. Now, usefully, because as you can see, this is a lot of setup, and if you're doing 5 refrigerators, you might not want to set the schedule up 5 different times. So once you've done one, you can click duplicate, and we see this copy, right? As I said, it appears inactive, right? It's like this. It's not live yet. Click this to open it. We can see that the schedule is the same as the one that we saved. Let's close that. All of this other stuff is the same, although I don't know why this is 7.5 minutes. I thought I had set it to 15. Maybe that changed. But all the important things, the requirements, that kind of thing, all of those are the same. And then when you're comfortable with it, then you just set it to go live, right? Although I do recommend changing the name. So we'll just leave that there. Finally, what I want to tell you about is double blind, right? And so we have this here. What this lets me do is I can put in a number. This is indicating actually to me what the range is. There shouldn't really be a range for double blind, but I was just adding a requirement. In fact, here, let's get rid of that range. We just say, in this case, must submit, and the value must be in USD, right? That makes more sense for a cash drop. So we'll click update. We've gotten rid of that. So I enter this here. And when I enter this, let's say I'll put in, I must have scrolled down. Let's put in 6, right? I click submit. One of the checks has been completed. We now need to switch to another person. And actually normally a person would be using a different device. So let's flip that over so that the second person can't see. So it's a different person. They can't see what the previous thing entered was. If Giselle here puts in 7 and clicks submit, it submits the check, but we'll see that it just shows. So because this failed, another check will appear, but it shows the 2 things that were entered. And so what we should see here, right? Previous failed, and because it failed, this one, it doesn't make sense that it's 17 minutes. This one should be 0 minutes, right? This should appear immediately. So for the next one, these settings here, they work retroactively. They don't work on the currently live ones, or at least some of them don't work on the currently live. So if this fails, in fact, let's just do it. Let's do 5. Oops, that happens when you scroll. Let's do 6, submit, and we will switch back to Jake, and we'll refresh. And right, this is the same. Oh wait. Hold on a second here. Maybe because of let's reset this one. So pausing it removes all of the currently live checks. It saves the old ones. Deactivating it removes any live checks, and then reactivating it reschedules according to this. So let's just make sure that we have this at what we want. Let's make this 15. There's no device. We're recording in these values. Okay, that's what we want. So just to make sure it's fully activated, we set the schedule. It's supposed to repeat at 11. This explains why it got a little messy. Let's make this repeat then at 11:45 and save. And that should make it appear here, right? 25 minutes left. So that 29 minutes is the expire time plus the time remaining, right? So 15 minutes remaining until it goes live, and then 15 minutes to expire. So it's 29 minutes until you must complete the check. Okay, so we have this here, and let's close this. So I am set to Giselle right now. Right. So then let's put in 5 and click, 2. Let's do that, click submit. So I have submitted. As Giselle, I can see that I have submitted. What I then do, let's say I refresh the page, but I am Jake. Upcoming checks. And I see that one's been completed, but I can't see what. So what do we decide? 2. Let's say I put in 3, submit, but it failed, so it pops up again. And we can see the completed ones. We can see how they failed, what was entered. But this is a way of sort of enforcing a blind check. And here, the way we turn on blind check is we click this, double blind. So when it's double blind, 2 different people need to enter it, and if it doesn't meet the requirement, like any other check, it pops back up. So that, I believe, is all of the functionality of checks.